Okay, so welcome to causal reasoning. As you know, causal reasoning is Unit 9, and the course we are undertaking for which we are having this lecture. And that course is titled UGRC 150, Critical Thinking and Practical Reasoning. So let me say welcome to this course. As you know, it's a course that deals with the different ways we reason about issues. At this point, you must have done some classes, treated some other topics, and so you are supposed to have trained yourself on the procedures of deductive and inductive reasoning. So by now you are pretty much familiar with these two kinds of reasoning. That having been done, we can now go ahead to introduce causal reasoning. Causal reasoning is a type of inductive reasoning that focuses on causal relationships. In fact, it deals with reasoning from cause to effect, and sometimes from effect to cause. What causes what? How do we know it is a cause? And in order to understand this topic well, we just have to begin by understanding the different senses of the word cause. What does it mean to say something has cost something? So different senses of cause. First of all, we have proximate cause. That's the immediate cause of something, even if that thing has more remote and foundational causes. Example, Samson decided to become an armed robber. He decided to become an armed robber. It put him in a situation where he engaged in a shootout with the police, and the police killed him. So we're talking about proximate cause. The proximate cause of Samson's death is his decision to become an armed robber. That's like the immediate cause of his death. But that's speaking in context. We're comparing this to other kinds of causes. So as we move on, you'll see that the other causes are a bit more remote compared to his decision to be an armed robber. So let's see the other causes. Now, we just looked at proximate cause. What is contributory cause? Contributory cause is a cause among many other causes. For example, a distressed economy contributed to Samson's decision to become an armed robber and hence to end up being killed by the police. So a distressed economy, among other causes, contributed to Samson's decision to be an armed robber and to get killed. So a contributory cause is when there are many causes, or at least more than one cause, and any of those causes can be called a contributory cause because it is not the only cause. Then we have necessary cause, or cause as necessary condition. When something is a necessary condition for another thing, without it, the other will not exist. Example, without oxygen, life is impossible. So oxygen is a necessary cause of life, And then we have sufficient cause, or cause as sufficient condition. When something could be a sufficient condition for an effect, if the presence of that thing is adequate for the presence of the effect. One does not need to express doubt at seeing the effect when she sees the condition. Example, to be prevented from inhaling oxygen for 20 minutes is sufficient cause for death. And so we say this is an example of a sufficient cause. If you don't inhale oxygen, if you don't get oxygen in you for a certain length of time, it's sufficient for death to occur. Another example of sufficient cause, proving that a healthy and sane person calculatedly committed a murder is an adequate condition for sentencing the person to life imprisonment if this is the appropriate sentencing for such a crime in that jurisdiction. So once a healthy and sane person has been proved to have committed murder, then it's been established that he or she did it deliberately and with her full senses and reasoning faculties intact, And so he or she was not mad, was not insane, was not unhealthy, was not sick, So we would say that health and sanity, and then evidence of murder are sufficient to have established such a crime, Then we have individually necessary and jointly sufficient conditions. We can say that there are several individually necessary conditions for an effect, and that a combination of these conditions becomes sufficient for the effect. In life and in science, it is usually difficult to determine what number of causes are jointly sufficient for an effect to occur. You see, it is easier to identify necessary causes than to identify sufficient causes. So conversely, it is more difficult to identify what are sufficient conditions. Let's see an example. Oxygen, water, food, and health are independently necessary conditions for a human being to stay alive. But they, and some other factors we may not know yet, are sufficient for staying alive. So each of these factors is a necessary condition for life. But the question is, how many of them needs to come together to form life? We may not know. So let's assemble oxygen, water, food, and health, and then we'll find out if life will occur. Probably life will not occur. And so, and then it is likely we don't know all the other conditions, necessary conditions that need to join these ones for life to occur. And that is why I would say it is normally more difficult to establish a sufficient condition than to establish a necessary condition. Then we have probabilistic cause. This is the opposite of necessary cause. This kind of cause is theoretically not necessary or a must for the effect. Example, a crisis within the economy, the lack of a job, and the need to marry and settle down are probable causes of Samson's decision to become an armed robber. So we are saying that a probabilistic cause is not a necessary cause. It doesn't need to lead to an effect. And in this example, we're saying that a crisis within the economy, the lack of a job, and one problem of the other caused Samson's decision to become an armed robber. Now, none of these causes is a necessary cause. Many of us also had all these factors. We passed through all these factors. We were raised up in a crisis within the economy. We lacked jobs. We needed to marry and settle down, but we had no money in our pockets. And yet, some of us didn't end up as armed robbers. And that is why we say they are probabilistic causes. They are opposites of necessary causes. Then we have causal agent as cause. A causal agent is also a cause. Example, Clement is a cause of the crisis. So Clement is a causal agent. Remember that agents are active participants. And that is why human beings are examples of agents. And then we have causal chain and causal web. A causal chain is an instance where we have so many causes, each one leading to another. One thing causes another, and then that one causes another, and so on. That's what we call a causal chain. And on the other hand, a causal web is when the relationship is between causes is more like a web than a chain. So in that case, we have two contributory causes, two or more contributory causes occurring simultaneously. Let's see examples of both. Example of causal chain. Samson graduated but could not find a job. He attempted self-employment but did not show enough determination to succeed in his chosen craft. He went to a bar one day and met a friend who introduced him to a gang. Samson agreed to join the gang because he was hungry and out of cash. He joined the gang and became an armed robber. He and his gang had a number of successful robberies, but on one of those escapades, they ran into the police. There was a shootout and Samson was hit. Samson was rushed to hospital where he died of gunshot injuries. So you can see an example of a causal chain. Everything about Samson's death started from his graduation and inability to find a job. And so one thing led to another and another and another until Samson died. That's what we call a causal chain. And then an example of a causal web. It could be that the police officer who killed Samson did so because he, the officer, aimed his gun correctly, whilst his colleagues did not. And at the same time, Samson got killed because he squeezed his trigger to kill the police person before the police person killed him, but found that there were no more bullets in the firing chamber of his gun. So a causal web is when several causes are leading to an effect at the same time. All those causes are generating an effect by occurring simultaneously. So Samson is squeezing his trigger with his gun pointed at the policeman. The policeman is also squeezing the trigger of his gun, and the gun is pointed at Samson. Now, the reason why Samson died and the policeman did not die is that there was a bullet in the firing chamber of the policeman's gun, but there was none in the firing chamber of Samson's gun. That's why Samson ended up the one dead. But the two shots or the two triggers were squeezed at the same time. So that makes it a causal web. Now let's tease our brains a little. I can trace Nanado's victory all the way to an advice his father gave him when he was a child. This is an example of a one proximate cause, contributory cause, probabilistic cause, causal chain. So we can see it's an example of a causal chain. USA had a hand in the ousting and killing of Patrice Lumumba, first head of state of DR Congo. This is an example of a proximate cause, contributory cause, probabilistic cause, causal chain. Now, let's go back to the question again. USA had a hand or has a hand in the killing of Patrice Lumumba. That means it's a contributory cause because a hand means that there were other hands. So contributory cause is the answer. You need to at least pay a house rent if you wish to live in that house. This is an example of a contributory cause, probabilistic, necessary, sufficient. You need to at least pay a house rent. So that is a necessary cause. Paying a house rent is necessary to living in that house. Are you aware that the lady you dated is the reason why you did not do well in your exams? This is an example of a necessary, contributory, probabilistic, and causal agent. So the lady you dated is the reason why you did not do well. So the lady is a causal agent. A lot of factors contributed to the emergence of the idea of multiculturalism. First, World War II ended with the defeat of the Nazis who wanted to conquer the world and put everyone under a single ideology. Second, it was the era of independence, and most former colonies were acquiring their independence, which was a message of equality and mutual tolerance. Third, African Americans in America were demanding for respect and equal treatment. Fourth, the United Nations had made a declaration on the fundamental human rights. This is an example of a contributory cause, probabilistic cause, causal chain, causal web. Which one is it? A look again at the first sentence. A lot of factors contributed to the emergence of the idea of multiculturalism. First, World War ended with bits on that. Second, it was the era of independence. Third, African Americans in America were demanding for respect. And then fourth, the United Nations had made a declaration on fundamental human rights. So all these factors were contributing to the idea of multiculturalism, and they were all doing so at once. So the answer is causal web. She died because she drank a heavy dose of poison. This is an example of a contributory, necessary, probabilistic, sufficient cause. She died because she drank a heavy dose of poison. That should be sufficient cause. So that brings us to the end of the different senses of the word cause, the different meanings of what we say something caused something. Now, to the second half of our lecture today. Having known the different senses of the word cause, we shall now look at some informal causal reasoning patterns. Now, to begin, causal reasoning is a type of inductive argument attempting to establish the causal relationship between phenomena or events. A type of inductive argument attempting to establish the causal relationship between phenomena and events. Second, a causal claim indicates that something causes another. That's a causal claim. When you say something causes another, you have made a causal claim. Third, a causal hypothesis is an initial speculation made in relation to a causal claim, a supposition offered as a starting point for further investigation. So when you make an initial speculation about a causal claim, and then you are supposing that the speculation could lead to investigation, or that some investigation could be carried out to confirm the speculation, then you have made a causal hypothesis. So right now we want to study two things. First, we want to look at the various informal causal reasoning strategies for arriving at causal claims. And secondly, we would like to look at the various experimental strategies for confirming causal hypothesis. But this second one is not for this semester. So right now we're just going to study various informal causal reasoning strategies for arriving at causal claims. How do we arrive at our causal claims? How on earth do we know that something caused something? There are some basic processes in our brains that take place in order to give us an idea of what caused what. And it is those basic processes that we call informal causal reasoning patterns. Right now, we're going to take a look at a number of them. John Stuart Mill, in his book titled A System of Logic, had enunciated 5 approaches for detecting causation by observation. And out of these 5, we shall study 3. And the 3 of them are the relevant difference reasoning, the common thread reasoning, and the concomitant variation reasoning. So let's look at the 3 of them. We'll begin with the relevant difference reasoning. This is a method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred differently from others as a cause of an effect. So A is the difference among others, so A caused the effect. Let's see how it works. Example. I've always taken tea and bread for my breakfast, but on a certain day last month, I fell sick shortly after my breakfast. I treated the illness and fell sick again last week after my breakfast. So at a point, I asked myself why I have fallen sick on these 2 occasions after breakfast. And it occurs to me that on these occasions, I had taken marmalade with the breakfast. I checked the information provided on the marmalade container, and I can see that the product has expired long ago. I then suspect that this is the reason why I have fallen sick twice. Since I've always taken tea and breakfast without any issues, then it means that the expired marmalade becomes the relevant difference in explaining the possible cause of the 2 illnesses. So in this case, we see that I have taken tea all my life without incident. And then suddenly I fall sick each time I take breakfast. And then I ask myself why. And when I look properly, or when I think properly, it occurs to me that a product I bought recently, which I've started using for my breakfast, is coinciding with the number of times I fell sick after breakfast. And so that product becomes the relevant difference. It is different from what has happened all my life when I'm taking tea and bread. You know. So that's how we identify relevant differences that become causes that we see as causes of effects. Then we have common thread reasoning. And this is a method of reasoning that identifies something that occurred in all the instances that have led to a particular effect. Identifying something that occurred in all the instances that have led to a particular effect. So, for example, A is a common thread among all the events. So A is the cause. Let's see how it works. Example. When I bought the marmalade some months ago, I had gone shopping in the company of my neighbors, and we had all bought the same stock of marmalade, which expired at the same time. Assume my neighbors are equally sick, and they all trace the cause of their illnesses to the same expired marmalade. It means we have all identified the expired marmalade as a common thread in all the cases of this particular illness in the neighborhood. So let's assume it's not just me, but me and some of my neighbors, we had all gone to the same supermarket, bought the same product from the same shelf, and all of them belong to the same stock, which had expired. And then each of us have been having stomach problems after taking a meal involving the expired marmalade or product. By the time we all discover that the same product is the cause of all our problems, then we have all identified a common thread running through all the cases of stomach illnesses. And so before I go to the next method of calling, I want to comment that relevant difference and common thread sometimes and even usually work together. Sometimes if you want to identify the cause of an epidemic or a pandemic, what do you do? First of all, you isolate and test a sample in the population, a sample that is suffering the same symptoms with all those other people who are suffering the same thing. Identify one of the samples, test it, and see what's wrong. Now, when you are testing that sample, you are looking for a relevant difference in the life of that sample. That sample, if it's a human being, has been alive and never had that problem, and all of a sudden he or she starts having the problem. What is the relevant difference in the life of that person that brought about the disease? What did she do? Did she go somewhere and contract something? What is it she contracted? By the time you are able to identify the relevant difference that is the cause of the person's illness, then the next question you ask yourself is if the same thing is responsible for all the other persons that are having the same symptoms. And if you confirm that, then it means that you have found both a relevant difference and a common thread that explains the epidemic or the pandemic. So the usual thing is to start by investigating to find a relevant difference, and then if you find it, you then seek to confirm if it's also a common thread that runs through other cases that are similar. So that's how the two of them work. They often work hand in hand. Now let's look at the third method of identifying the degree of occurrence of something rather than its simple presence or absence. So we're not looking for the presence or the absence of something. Maybe that thing is always present, so there's no sense looking for its absence. What we are rather interested in is its degree of existence or occurrence. Now, this method is used when we cannot eliminate a particular cause from the environment. Example, carbon dioxide. Now, you know you cannot eliminate carbon dioxide from the environment. So if you are investigating something that is being caused by carbon dioxide, you're not asking, is carbon dioxide present or is it absent? No, that's not the question you ask. You rather ask, at what degree is carbon dioxide present? Is it high? Is it present in the atmosphere at a high degree, in which case it becomes toxic? What is its degree of presence? So it is useless to use relevant difference to identify carbon dioxide as a cause of ill health. You rather use a method that measures its degree or intensity. For example, it was revealed through research that high blood pressure is exacerbated in regions whose soils have low levels of selenium. Now, this is a metal that exists in tiny quantities in every soil, and because of this, we cannot measure for its absence of presence. We can only account for the effects of varying degrees of it, and hence the discovery that it seems correlative with the ability of our bodies to keep our blood pressure normal. Now, selenium is a metal that exists in tiny quantities in every soil, and there are indications that selenium, when it is present in a soil, has some relationship with our blood pressure, the blood pressure of humans. And so if it exists if it is scarce in a certain area, it affects the level of blood pressure of people living in that area. So if you want to find out the effect of selenium on people's blood pressure in a certain area, you will not be trying to find out whether selenium is absent. Of course, it will be there in the soil. What you'll be trying to find out is what is its intensity or degree in the soil? How much of it is in the soil, or how little? Second example, it was discovered that high levels of sulfur dioxide pollution in the air was responsible for high rates of deaths in London between November and December 1952. There's no way to eliminate sulfur dioxide from the air. The experiment discovered the causal connection by comparing the increase and decrease of the effect, number of deaths per day, to the variation in degrees of sulfur dioxide fumes in the air, the daily variation. Sulfur dioxide is always in the atmosphere. What matters is at what level, degree, or intensity is it in the atmosphere. If it is very high in degree, then it could cause health issues, including deaths. And so when there are certain problems occurring, medical problems, you might need to check to see the level of sulfur dioxide in the air. So that method is what we call concomitant variation. Now let's exercise our minds a little. Kofi has had accidents with 6 of his cars in the last 3 months. This is an example of a what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. Kofi had had accidents with 6 of his cars in the last 3 months. So what are you looking for? You're looking for what makes the difference. We are talking about 6 cars. What is it about these 6 cars that led to the accident? It is Kofi himself. So Kofi is the relevant difference in finding the causes of these accidents. There is an unspoken understanding that those who were trained in European and American universities are better equipped for their jobs and should be given This is an example of a what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. The supposition that those who were trained in European and American universities are better equipped compared to those who were trained elsewhere. What should that be? That will be common thread, because what is running through all the examples, if the supposition is true, is being trained in European and American universities. Your computer is more likely to last longer if it is an Apple product. This is an example of what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. What should it be? Your computer is more likely to last longer if it is an Apple product. First of all, we ask ourselves the question, what makes a product or a laptop or a computer to last longer? Why would a computer last longer? What makes it last longer? Because it is made with stronger materials. And those of us who know Apple products know that Apple products are much stronger compared to other products. And so what it means is that or resilience of the product. And so some products have a higher degree of strength and resilience and durability compared to some other products. And so when you begin to talk about different degrees of something, then you are talking about concomitant variation. So the answer to this question will be concomitant variation. One of the reasons why Michael succeeds where others have failed is that he studies his problems carefully before taking action. One of the reasons why Michael succeeds where others have failed is that he studies his problems carefully before taking action. This is an example of what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. It should be relevant difference, because the relevant difference in all these cases is what? Michael. Michael explains why he succeeds where others failed. Just like Kofi explains why he is always having accidents. Male soccer teams from Cameroon are always filled with tall, hard-bodied men. My father said it's because of the prominence of plantain, a key provider of zinc, in the average Cameroonian diet. Many of us must have known a lot of Cameroonian players who had muscular bodies. So this is an example of a what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variation, false common thread. So it should be what? Common thread. And what is a common thread? A plantain diet. It has been discovered that living longer is associated with low protein intake. It has been discovered that living longer is associated with low protein intake at middle age and moderate to high protein intake at old age. It has been discovered that living longer is associated with low protein intake at middle age and moderate to high protein intake in old age. This study was actually done by Levin et al. 2014. This is an example of what? Relevant difference, common thread, concomitant variations for common thread. Now, what causes longer life? Protein intake. At a point, you have low protein intake. At another time, you should have a higher protein intake. So we are talking about what? Degrees of protein intake. And that means the answer is concomitant variation. That brings us to the end of the three informal causal reasoning patterns. So by now we understand relevant difference, common thread, and concomitant variation. Now that we have seen some basic causal reasoning patterns, how we identify causes in our daily lives, let's now look at causal fallacies, or fallacies of causal reasoning, or bad causal reasoning. That is, let's look at how we shouldn't do causal reasoning. We've just seen how we reason causally, and now it's time to look at how we should not reason causally. These fallacies are committed when a link between an alleged cause and effect depends on a causal link that does not exist. The first fallacy, causal fallacy, is called the post hoc ego propter hoc, or the fallacy of inferring causality from chronology. Example: for the first time today, I took beans for breakfast, and I performed wonderfully in my mathematics test. Therefore, a breakfast of beans is very crucial to mathematical proficiency. So just because I took beans for the first time in my life today, and when I went to the exam hall, I did wonderfully in my mathematics test, should I then conclude that the beans must have played a role in my mathematical performance? So just because something occurred before something doesn't mean it caused it, So that's the fallacy of inferring causality from chronology. Chronology means something happening before something or something happening after something. That's what we call chronology. It's another name for time. This happens, this happens, this happens. Chronology or history, So the fact that something happened before something doesn't always mean it caused it, So the fact I took beans before I went to the exam hall doesn't mean that the beans must have caused my wonderful mathematics performance. Then we have non-causal pro-causal, or the fallacy of exchanging or confusing cause for effect. Example: Michael is a poor student because he performs poorly in examinations. Now, to correct this fallacy, we would rather say Michael performs poorly in examinations because he's a poor student. It is not because he's a poor student that he performs poorly in examinations. Or rather, it's not because he performs poorly in examinations that he's a poor student. It is because he's a poor student that he performs poorly in examinations. So it is the other way around. Then we have oversimplified cause. Oversimplified cause is when there are many causes, and then the argument identifies only one of them as a cause. Example: the Cameroonian team won a trophy because their coach is paid a higher salary. So this is an oversimplified cause. We all know that a high salary alone cannot give victory. Even a poorer paid coach can deliver victory, And so to understand why a team is victorious, we need to look at several factors, including the coach's high salary and then other factors too. Identifying only one of them as responsible for the team's victory is a fallacy of oversimplified cause. Then we have false common thread. False common thread is when we infer a common thread as a cause when it is not. Example: all the academically bright guys in my class have cars, so I will get a car as part of my desire to be academically bright. Now, I notice that a common thread running through all the bright guys in my class, all the guys getting good grades in my class, is that they all have cars. And then I conclude that having a car has something to do with getting good grades. But that could be a false common thread, because there's no relationship between having a car and getting good grades. So it could just be accidental that they have cars and they also get good grades. Then we have confusing correlation with causation. Just because two things occur together always doesn't mean there's a direct causal relationship between them. Example, each time a car moves, we see smoke coming from the exhaust tube. Therefore, the smoke causes the car to move. So to correct it, we'll say the smoke is not what causes a car to move. Both the movement and the smoke are caused by the engine combustion. So it is the engine causing both. The engine causes both the movement of the car and the smoke coming out from the car. So the fact that two things occur together doesn't mean that one of them must be causing another. It could be that both of them are actually caused by something else. You don't know. You need to investigate to be sure. Then we have this interesting causal fallacy called slippery slope. When we suggest that a relatively insignificant event will cause a more significant event, which in turn will cause an even more significant event, and the order of significance continues to increase without adequate justification as to why each significant event will lead to a more significant event. And so we form a progressively dubious chain of premises, which are usually consequences, to support a claim or a conclusion. Now let's see how it works. It's the fallacy of arguing that if A is allowed, it will trigger a set of events that eventually lead to Z. And it's only a matter of time to go from A to Z, to slip down a slippery slope from A all the way to Z. Now, this should not be a fallacy if the causal movement from A to Z is justified. It is a fallacy if the causal movement is not justified or justifiable, which means that it is fatalism, an extreme version of determinism. Let's look at the first example. If Donald Trump becomes the president, America will fight many wars. If Donald Trump becomes the president, America will fight many wars. Democrats in the USA 2016 presidential election campaign. So in 2016, when Donald Trump was running for president, the Democrats were telling people that if you elect this man, we'll find ourselves in many wars before we know it. So they were capitalizing on the fact that Donald Trump is very blunt with his words, doesn't mince words, and sometimes he talks tough, and he has a rather abrasive manner. So, but it's a slippery slope to assume that that will ultimately lead to many wars. Second example, it is wrong to believe in God, because then you would eventually believe in not just God, but all kinds of, then you come to believe that spirits, and then you come to believe that inanimate, and then you come to believe that everything has spirits and power to do something and the other, thereby ultimately destroying your ability to evaluate cause and effect in natural terms. And so someone tells you that if you believe in God, you will eventually believe in all kinds of spirits. And then from there, you will eventually believe that spirits have all kinds of power. And from there, you believe that inanimate objects have spirits. Everything around you has spirits. The chair you sit in is a spirit. The table in front of you is a spirit. The laptop, the computer in front of you is actually a spirit. All these things are spirits. And then you are swarming in a world of spirits and getting drowned, And then you come to believe that everything has spirits and power to do something, that would be incredible, and cataclysmic. So that's a slippery slope fallacy. You can believe in God without coming to believe in all these things. Then the third example, I cannot allow my child to go outdoors and play in a compound This is because if I do, she will jump fence and go into the streets. If she goes into the streets, she will run away with any stranger. If she runs away with any stranger, then I'll never see her again. If I never see her again, I'll be miserable for the rest of my life. If I'm miserable for the rest of my life, I will commit suicide. So for the purpose of the avoidance of suicide, I will not allow my child to play outdoors in my compound. So this argument is that if I allow my child to play outdoors in my compound, it will lead to a slippery slope all the way to my committing suicide. So you can see why we call it a fallacy of slippery slope. All those consequences don't need to occur. It's a very long stretch. Now let's exercise our minds a little bit again. I noticed that most of the great people in this country attended the Achimota High School. So I will attend that school because I want to be like them. This is an example of what? False common thread, oversimplified cause, confusing correlation with causation, relevant difference. So what is it? Obviously, we're looking at what is the factor here? The factor behind being great is attending Achimota High School. So most of the great people in Ghana attended Achimota High School. So Achimota High School becomes a kind of common thread running through the great people in Ghana. But is it a true common thread or a false common thread? And so it should be a false common thread because there are a lot of great people that attended other schools. And so we shall say it is a false common thread. Russia's military is more powerful than the terrorist organization because the military destroyed the organization last week. This is an example of a what? Post hoc ego propter hoc, and then non-causal pro causa, confusing correlation with causation, and slippery slope. Yeah, so the post hoc ego propter hoc is not spelled correctly. The ego is supposed to come before the propter. Now, but back to the question, Russia's military is more powerful because the military destroyed the terrorist organization. So is it because Russia's military destroyed that terrorist organization that is powerful? No. It should rather be that Russia's military destroyed that organization because Russia's military is more powerful. So this sentence, as it is committing a fallacy of non-causa pro causa. It is not because Russia destroyed a terrorist organization that it is more powerful than that organization. It is because Russia is more powerful than the terrorist organization that Russia destroyed the terrorist organization. I remember you visited a native doctor in January. That must be the problem behind the problems you are having with your business. You visited a native doctor in January, and since then you've been having problems with your business. So that's what? A post hoc ego propter hoc. Because visiting a native doctor is not a guarantee that that's why you're having problems with your business. You can attribute Gabriel's success as a lawyer to the support he receives from his wife. This is an example of what? So Gabriel is successful as a lawyer because of the support he receives from his wife. What is that? So that should be an oversimplified cause because the support of Gabriel's wife alone cannot make him a successful lawyer. He's a successful lawyer because he works hard, he does his research well, his wife is giving him support. So we can say, yeah, his wife's support is a contributory cause because it helps him to work hard and to do his research well. But that support alone cannot make him a successful lawyer. If she supports him and he doesn't work hard, he cannot be a successful lawyer, So saying his success is due to the support he receives from his wife is oversimplified cause. time I win a game of chess at the club, I happen to have mistakenly used the wrong key to attempt to lock my front door. So whenever I mistakenly use the wrong key to lock my front door, I know I'll win a game of chess at the club. This is an example of what? False common thread, oversimplified cause, confusing correlation with causation, relevant difference. Now, this is an example of confusing correlation with causation, because this guy has associated winning chess games with using the wrong key to lock his front door. So he thinks that they are not just correlative, but they could also be have a causal relationship. So that one of them might be causing the other. And that brings us to the end of our class. And so I would recommend that you watch your lecture videos regularly, read your textbooks regularly, do the exercises in your textbooks, check your Sakai platforms regularly for updates, announcements, and assessments. And at the end of the day, I would say good luck. So that brings us to the end of our lecture. And I hope that you would watch this lecture several times and do the exercises in your textbooks so that you will these things. Good luck.